it seems the political temperature is still rising around the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and the money that he received in cash, the US dollars, maybe 4 million, he says it wasn't, but was then stolen from his home. He says it was not as much as that, but it does appear from what we do know at the moment that the president may well have broken foreign exchange rules. He did not report the income in US dollars to the Reserve Bank. Also not certain if this income was ever reported to SARS. Professor Mcedisi Mdletyana is a professor of politics at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, good afternoon to you. I mean, there's several problems here. I suppose one of the key problems is that the president says he's a reformer, that he's going to renew the ANC, that he's fighting against corruption. I mean, is that really his key problem? He set himself up for what could be a major fall.
Well, I think he meant it when he said he would change the ANC. There are obviously a lot of things that he has had to do that. But this, of course, this can be used somewhat by his critics to say, actually, this fellow is not different from the previous one. And then they would poo-poo this whole idea of him changing the ANC. But I think that this has come out does not necessarily taint entirely his suitability for that mission of changing the ANC. I mean, there are a lot of things here, Stephen. Some we know, some we don't know. But what we certainly know is that the money is his. And it is not unusual for him at his house, which he uses as a business for wild or game farm. It's a game farm where you have animals that are bought for millions of rands. We know that he bought a buffalo for 20 million. So it's not unusual if for instance, auctions get held at that farm for that amount of money to be there. So that's not unusual. It's common sense. And so he didn't steal it, or it's his money. But there are other questions to that. Why didn't he bank it? Did he declare this foreign currency? So there may be a question of breach of regulations. And these are this is where the dissimilarity, the difference rather, comes in between him and JZ. I mean, the difference is vast, it's massive. They're world apart. In this case, you have a possible breach of failure to declare money to SARS. It's different from stealing money, very different. And of course, there are also accusations that those that were subsequently investigated were somewhat tortured or harmed by the police. And there's an interesting question that we must ask there. On whose instructions were they doing that, the police? Could the president have instructed the police to go and torture? I don't know. I doubt it. So knowing what we know and admitting that there are certain things that we don't know, I would give him the benefit of doubt and state quite firmly that he is certainly not different from his predecessor.
You say he's very different from...
Certainly different.
Yes.
Certainly different.
I'm glad we clarified that, Professor, because it would have made a great clip for a minute. Okay. So you say he's very different from former President Jacob Zuma. I mean, that may be true. I suppose his allies, if we wanted to argue the president's side for a moment, would point to the independent appointments he's made to the NPA, to SARS. I mean, there can be, the difference between Edward Kieswetter and Tomiani is absolutely massive. At the same time, though, I mean, he has to explain why there was cash and he didn't declare it. Because we know cash, US dollars, is what criminals use. It is what people do when they don't want government to know how much money they have.
Well, this is where I'm not sure how many other interviews we've had, Stephen, with people in the hunting world and all that stuff. But what one has heard is that it's not uncommon for these folks to use cash. And in the case of Cyril, remember, he's not selling chickens or goats. He's selling big game, millions of rands each. And also there's a question about how long do you have from selling something, receiving the money, to declaring it. Maybe it may well be that it was within the allowed period for him to have the money. He had not exceeded the limit by which he must have reported it. So these are all questions that we should ask and are correctly going to be investigated. But I think at worst here, Stephen, what you are looking at could possibly be breach of regulations, declaration, or maybe tax. I don't know. But I would rather have someone whose major crime is not forgetting or lapsing from paying tax or something like that. But if in his case, most likely he is a regular taxpayer, this may well be a temporary lapse. I don't know, but I would rather have someone as a temporarily breaching, not paying tax, than someone else who's built the whole regime to plunder state resources.
For a long time, President Ramaphosa was easily the most popular politician in the country. I mean, there was no one close. He was the only one with approval ratings over 50%. And that, in a way, was, let me use the phrase, because every child I know watches superhero movies at the moment. That was his superpower, right? That's what gave him the cloak in the ANC. The ANC couldn't move against him. No one could really take him on because of this personal popularity. Does this dent his personal popularity, that he's, just like all the others, would sort of be the perception? And if that's the case, does that weaken his superpower in the ANC?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because we still have to prove that there's something terribly wrong that he has done. If, for instance, they say, well, normally he does declare he's a regular taxpayer, this and that, this is just an occasional thing. If they say that, then I don't think people will be entirely too unhappy with it. But if it comes out as something else completely obviously, then that will lead to different reactions. But fundamentally, and this is where, Stephen, we have to avoid becoming fatalistic. Things have been bad. They continue to be bad, and they're likely to remain bad. So we have this thing that none of these politicians are good. And when we look at them through this template that they're just terrible. So the slightest, misdemeanor or lapse is exaggerated to mean something completely. I mean, we have to maintain a little bit of perspective here. Even, for instance, the idea that, no, he should have declared to the police. Why didn't he declare? But the protection service were there. Those are the police. They're investigating. They should have reported this thing. And immediately there are suggestions that he stole this money. I mean, he can't possibly. And yet when you sit back just to think a little bit, you're like, okay, this fellow is a farmer. He sells buffaloes. He obviously would have so much money. So there's a frenzy that we tend to be get into, this mob mentality. And we've allowed ourselves to be excited by nonsensical topics. It's nationalization today, could be something else tomorrow. And we get all excited by these nonsensical things that divert us from key and important questions. And this might just be one of those. I know there's going to be a lot of flack. Might just be one of those. And so, yes, we must look at it, but we must maintain a little bit of perspective. Don't lose our minds. Get into a frenzy. He must resign. Because you are talking of a presidency. For him to resign instantly at the mere mention of money being found from someone who's supposed to have money anyway is completely absurd. Right? So when we look at these things, we must ask questions, definitely. But at the same time, be smart enough to say, okay, let's find out what we don't know. Once the information is there, then we can scream all sorts of things. But there is no nobility. There's no sense in rushing to make decisions when there is a lot of information we don't know. So that kind of perspective is very important. Politicians can scream, can march, but I think you and I are kind of supposed to inject a little bit of perspective into this thing and calm down emotions.
And I would suggest that Arthur Fraser's publication of these claims is probably the most overt political act against the president since he became the president. That would be my claim. How does the president respond? If this is now the beginning of, open warfare in the ANC, should the president take a stronger stance against his enemies instead of, prioritizing the unity of the ANC, which I think he's done over the last few years? Could he now go on the offensive, or should he now go on the offensive in the ANC?
There are two things there. I'm glad that you raised Arthur. Firstly, let me start off with something you and I have discussed before about the judgment of this president. There are certain decisions really that he has taken which did not make sense at all. He came in as a president inheriting an administration in which the intelligence community was a major problem. It had been used against opponents by JZ, and JZ filled it up with his cronies. So when you come in as a new president, it was possibly used against him as well, one way or another. So when you come in as a new president, you're inheriting this beast that is often deployed against enemies. And so the idea is to reconfigure it. But what he does, he appoints Jojo. And he didn't even trust Jojo, Ayanda Jojo. And having appointed Jojo, continues to ignore her. This July 17 unrest, Jojo was sending reports to the president. President, I don't even know if he read them, but he never acknowledged them. The Security Council Committee never met. And the intelligence is a department that the president uses as his eyes and ears. This is elementary stuff that any president would know, even from the smallest marginal country. That president would have known, but this president didn't know. So that's bad judgment. Is he what? Does he not have a full appreciation of what his job entails, or is he lazy, or what's happening here? Those are kind of questions that I have continued to ask. Then you have Arthur. You found Arthur there, having been appointed by JZ. Arthur is a JZ person out and out. He has continued to prove that. Instead of firing him, paying him out and flushing him out of the system, he appoints him as DG of Correctional Service. I don't know if maybe we didn't have money or the law prohibited him from firing Arthur completely. But that kind of mollycoddling of people you know quite well that are against you. And Arthur has gone to prove that he's against this presidency. Right? So these are decisions that the president, Steve, has made, which are mind-boggling. Hopefully now, I mean, if this doesn't knock some sense into him, then I don't know what else will. That you need to be aware of the wolves within your administration and act upon them and act immediately. And Arthur, by the way, who's now celebrated as a whistleblower, is a rogue of note.